Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Georgia Gang on this Sunday, May 19th. The race is on. Insurance Commissioner John King is the latest Republican to jump into the 2026 Senate race. Also, Governor Brian Kemp signs a flurry of new laws, including a measure that could force Fulton County taxpayers to cover President Trump's legal fees in the election interference case. And a $2 billion cancer verdict, and now a new Georgia law could protect the company behind it. Melita, Phil, and Brian are all here. Alicia Thomas-Searcy is filling in for Theron. Welcome back. The debate and discussion begin right now.
From the Fox 5 studios, the Georgia Gang starts now.
We begin with the U.S. Senate race in Georgia, and the GOP field is shifting fast. Insurance Commissioner John King officially jumped into the race to unseat Democratic Senator Jon Ossoff. He joins Congressman Buddy Carter, who was the first to announce on the GOP side. King, a former police chief and the first Hispanic statewide official in Georgia. King says he can appeal to a broad coalition of conservative voters. Brian, your thoughts on Insurance Commissioner King jumping into this race? No surprise.
No, he's telegraphed to us for quite some time that if Kemp didn't get in, that he would be a candidate, and certainly he triggered his campaign very quickly after that announcement. And having a statewide network, that's obviously a good place to start for a statewide campaign for U.S. Senate. But anybody down ballot is going to face the issue of not having a lot of name ID. And so he's going to need to go buy that. And that's going to require a lot of money in very small increments because the federal limits are smaller than the state limits. That's why you're seeing Congressman Buddy Carter spend more than $2 million a year out from the primary to build his name ID. He's trying to signal to Washington and to donors that I'm a serious candidate and I have a lot of money and I'm going to be able to put it in, and that's going to be a huge advantage going into 2026. So you do not see regular candidates spend money this early. So how does John King, who doesn't have personal wealth, compete with folks who are willing to put in $2 million a year out from a primary? That's going to be something he needs to explain to the donor class and to Governor Kemp as he continues to negotiate with Trump about who the Republicans are going to rally behind in this race.
I was going to go to Alicia first. Alicia, who do you think Jon Ossoff would like to see or to battle it out with?
I think he's good with anybody in the field. I'm thinking about John King in particular, who has been the insurance commissioner since 2018, and he doesn't really have a lot in terms of his record. I can't think of anything that he's done significantly in this role. And so
I will say he's a former police chief. He's spent time in the military.
Yes, and I'm going to say that.
Yes.
Give me a second. I appreciate his record in law enforcement and in the military, and that's great. But the job that you've been hired for these last 8 years or less has been insurance commissioner, and he has nothing to stand on. Even if you look on his on the website, his entire bio is about his law enforcement and military background. And so I think for Jon Ossoff, he has a record to stand on of standing on very important issues, whether it's child welfare issues, whether it's the economy. He's looking at housing right now, things that really matter to families. And so I think his strategy is going to be stand on my record. I think all of the other folks in the field, it feels like a pageant of who can be the biggest Miss or Mr. Trump loyalist, rather than having a record to stand on to talk about issues that really matter to people. So I think if Jon Ossoff, as our current U.S. Senator, continues to work on behalf of Georgians, focus on the issues that matter, his strategy to do that will be the winning strategy.
Phil, a lot to digest here. I used to cover John King when he was Doraville police chief years ago. One of the nicest guys I think you'll ever meet. I think one of his things that he can stand on is he cleaned up this office. He brought ethics back to the insurance department. So I think that's one of his big issues.
He
and that's
did. I'm glad
one.
you pointed that out because it was a mess and it was corrupt before he got in there, and Governor Kemp said that is your main responsibility right now, and Lori's right. And he has an excellent bio, and I think all of the potential Republican candidates have excellent bios, as opposed to Jon Ossoff, who barely has held a job. Also, Ossoff is underneath in the polling. He was polling 47%, even by the liberal Atlanta Constitution's poll. So the Republicans are in good shape. You're going to see more candidates coming out. You're going to see, and Brian alluded to this, Governor Kemp and President Trump have said we got to get somebody that'll unite the center and the right, because the center right now, according to polling, is with Republicans and their agenda. So the Republicans are going to have a multi-candidate primary, and it's going to be about the math as to who has this pathway.
Melita.
Senator Ossoff had some very fine points on his resume, and he's demonstrating his past as a journalist and an investigative unit in the way he questioned the EPD director about the closure of a Thomasville facility that was supposed to help address the long-term health problems caused by industrial pollution down there. I think it's interesting that King trailed Ossoff in the most recent polling by 13 points. And it's also interesting that the $2 million you were talking about for Buddy Carter spending early is part of $10 million in personal funds he's willing to spend to self-finance his campaign. So it's going to be a very, very aggressive campaign, and I think Ossoff will do very well once we see which of the Republicans emerges from the primary more than a year from now, because the Republicans are going to have fun trying to out-MAGA each other and also tear each other apart.
Okay, let's move on. Phil, Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene says she will not run for Senate, but no word yet on whether she'll run for governor. What are your sources telling you?
My sources say she is not running for governor. And I think the polling, she can read a poll just like anybody else, as I said last week. And she, like all the other Republicans, want to take out, the Democrat and hold, the governorship and hold the Senate seat. And so, again, I think you'll see different Republican candidates emerging. But I think she's going to be in there just plugging away. And I think she's fine right where she is in her Northwest Georgia bright red district.
Melita, on the Democratic side for governor, still no word from Stacey Abrams.
True. And I think a lot of people are really, really waiting to hear from her, but we do have a strong field emerging. And on the Marjorie Taylor Greene question, I think she also has to look at history, because we talked about on an earlier show when Lucy McBath was thinking about running, that Nathan Deal is the only person to take the governor's mansion after spending time in Congress in 100 years of Georgia history. And he had served in the state Senate first. Marjorie Taylor Greene has absolutely no state elected experience. It's been federal level experience.
Either of you want to weigh in on the governor's race?
Well, when it comes to Marjorie Taylor Greene, she didn't have any federal experience when she first ran either. And I tell you, she's a force of nature in debates and on TV. And she would make for an entertaining race if she ever got into it. I'm with Phil, she's not going to do it. Look, why would she run for something else? She has a national platform. She can go on social media and reach millions of people, can put out one tweet and get hundreds of thousands of dollars pouring into her account. She can walk into the Oval Office anytime that she wants. So she's in pretty good shape there. But this governor's race is where it is at. The Senate race, sure, it's important. It matters to the country. But if you live in Georgia, who the governor is impacts your life more than anything, much more so than who is your junior senator in the U.S. Senate. This is where it's at. And both parties in it's going to be a tight year. I think I'm a little more pessimistic than Phil, because this is going to be tough in Georgia in 2026. Republicans and Democrats have a chance of winning the governorship, and who they nominate will be determinative into it. You've got to have the best political athletes on the field, or you're going to lose.
Alicia.
You know, I'm so disappointed, Phil, that you think Marjorie Taylor Greene isn't going to run. I was really hoping that she would run for governor, because I would love to no longer call her my congresswoman. So I'm very disappointed in that. I think Brian makes a good point that this is going to be a very competitive race. I think what's interesting on both sides is that you have candidates who might do well in the primary but will be challenged in the general. And so I think the field on both sides is still open. But again, Marjorie Taylor Greene, please think about running.
Well, meanwhile, on the lieutenant governor front, Senate GOP leader Steve Gooch has launched his campaign, while Democrat Josh McLaurin, a state senator from Sandy Springs, made it official this week with a campaign kickoff in Savannah. Phil, I would imagine we would expect a lot more names in this race.
You will. And we live in Sandy Springs, of course, Lori, and we know Josh McLaurin's record. It's hard left wing. It's out of touch with the rest of the state. And so he's a weak candidate, just like the Democrat. We never talked about the Democrat potential gubernatorial candidates. Very weak. Keisha Lance Bottoms, who is anti-police basically. You've got Stacey Abrams, perhaps. Maybe Michael Thurmond is in the wings. Unfortunately, Jason Carter isn't running. He would have been the most competitive. So I think the Democrats for both lieutenant governor's race and the governor's race are in tough shape. And I would just add one more footnote to what Brian said with the governor is powerful. He appoints thousands thousands of people to boards and agencies, and you don't want the left wing controlling those.
Melita, I got to give you a chance to respond about
Amen
Josh.
to that, brother. That's what I was trying to say.
Oh, hush. I got to give Melita a chance to respond about Josh McLaurin.
Well, I think Josh McLaurin has some very fine qualities. He'll make a great lieutenant gubernatorial candidate. You're going to have at least 4 or 5 state senators vying for that job. And if Marjorie Taylor Greene is a force of nature, she's more like a tornado or hurricane than any other natural event.
All right, we're going to leave it there.
Amen to that.
All right, folks. Coming up, could Fulton County taxpayers be on the hook for President Trump's legal fees in the election interference case? We'll discuss after the break.
Have a question or comment for the Georgia Gang? Email them at georgiagang@foxtv.com.
Governor Brian Kemp wrapped up the legislative session by signing 120 bills into law before the deadline this week, including a measure to keep people with intellectual disabilities off death row. But another bill is drawing even more attention, Senate Bill 244. It could allow President Donald Trump to get reimbursed by taxpayers for millions of dollars that he spent defending himself in Georgia's election interference case. That case is now on pause while the Georgia Supreme Court considers whether to remove DA Fani Willis. And if that happens, Melita, Fulton County taxpayers could be left footing the bill for Trump's legal fees.
Yes, and so that bill, we might note, was sponsored by Brandon Beach, who is now the U.S. Treasurer and already on duty, although Governor Kemp has not called for that election yet. So yes, Fulton County taxpayers could be on the hook for Trump's legal fees, which is really kind of a remarkable thing. The other bill that you didn't mention is the fact that Kemp signed with reservation a bill that allows Senate and House committees investigative powers, and he urged them caution in using those powers, hoping that the state government would not get bogged down in the same way the federal government sometimes does.
Brian.
The law doesn't just apply to President Trump and the defendants in this case that Fani did against the folks from the 2020 election. It applies to almost anybody who's been unfairly prosecuted. So it's not just about him. Obviously, that is the impetus. I'm not going to get too cute about what it's really all about. But the fact that it is broader perhaps suggests that we need to look at this in the future to see how it's playing out. Look, Brandon Beach wanted to make a point about the Trump case. Point heard, point taken. It was a ridiculous prosecution that shouldn't have happened. I've said it here many times. But how is this going to play out in the future? I would imagine Kemp had some issues with this bill, actually, that he was probably a little concerned about it. But another part of that bill finally creates the compensation system and board review for people who've been exonerated of crimes they didn't commit. It's something I've worked on pro bono for years. I'm so thrilled that those poor guys who have had their lives destroyed are finally going to have a process to get some money to get back on their feet.
That's a good point. Alicia.
I think it's important to point out, though, that the law now is about not people who've been unfairly prosecuted, quote unquote. I don't think that applies to Donald Trump in this case. It's about defendants where the prosecutor is being removed from the case, which is still being considered at the Supreme Court level. So let's put that out there. And to Brian's point, yes, where you have a prosecutor who has been removed from a case in any other situation, we're not talking about Trump, you do need to make sure the defendant has their rights and that they are being fairly prosecuted. So it's important to make that distinction. I also want to point out, when we talk about the number of bills that the governor has signed, I appreciate the governor signing the law now that removes 3Qing, which is a literacy piece. And we've all been working, many of us, on making sure that we have the science of reading in Georgia. And so shout out to State Senator Rashawn Kemp, who passed that bill. He's a freshman senator, Democrat, and we're excited about that. Final thing that I want to say, it's very interesting, some of the bills that the governor did sign. It's a great example of no permanent friends, no permanent enemies, just permanent interests. I think his interests are around 2028. And so it'll be interesting to see what happens and what this new alliance between he and Trump will come to be in a few years.
Phil, weigh in on this.
Just a quick point on this, what I call the flawed RICO case against Trump and the 18 other co-defendants. it is also when prosecutors have conflicts of interest and are unethical, and that certainly applies to DA Fonnie Willis and probably some others down the road. Also, I think that the unfairness of it should be underscored. There's like one attorney. Let's just focus on one attorney who simply was giving legal advice to others on the Trump case. He was pulled in. This shows how reckless Willis was. So I'm glad that there's some fairness here with this. And one quick point, the GOP passed and Governor Kemp signed a bill removing taxes from military retirement income. I thought that was a great bill.
Okay, we'll leave it there. Coming up, a new law in Georgia could protect chemical companies from lawsuits even if their products are linked to cancer. We'll discuss next.
Join the discussion on the Georgia Gang Facebook page and watch past episodes on the Georgia Gang YouTube channel.
A controversial new law in Georgia could make it harder for people to sue chemical companies even if they believe a product made them sick. Governor Brian Kemp just signed Senate Bill 144, shielding manufacturers like Bayer, the maker of Roundup, from lawsuits as long as their labels follow federal guidelines. Now, the law comes after a Georgia man was awarded $2.1 billion in a case linking Roundup to cancer. Brian, to you first on this.
The $2.1 billion case is exactly why we need this legislation, and also, more broadly, why we needed the tort reform bill that was passed. Those are absurd numbers. No jury in Georgia should be putting out that much money to a single plaintiff when there's so little evidence to back up these claims. The only group that has said that this glyphosate, which is the chemical in Roundup that is under discussion, causes cancer is the same group that said that drinking coffee gives you cancer. You would have to drink 10,000 cups of coffee a day. And I know people probably think that I do, but I don't actually drink quite that much. It's no global government health authority has said that this chemical leads to cancer. Not one. And we also know that without this chemical, Georgia agriculture, our #1 industry, its output plummets, putting many farmers out of business in this state. This is a fairness issue. It is being used by people who can read the warnings on the label, and then you can make a decision for yourself as an independent thinking human being about whether or not you want to use it.
Oh, Melita, you want to weigh in?
Yes. Well, Roundup, the parent company, has settled many of these cases. So if they were completely innocent as the driven white snow, they wouldn't be settling cases. And I think it's interesting to note that former Governor Roy Barnes was part of the legal team and in fact argued the closing arguments in that $2.1 billion verdict that was handed down literally even as the legislature was hammering out this new law that gave both Bayer the free pass and the tort reform legislation. So, and in both instances, you're denying citizens who feel they've been harmed their right to a trial by jury, one of our most basic constitutionally protected freedoms.
Okay, I want to move on. A pregnant woman in Georgia who was declared brain dead after a medical emergency has been on life support for 3 months to let the fetus grow enough to be delivered. Now, her family says the hospital told them this was required under the state's abortion law. Alicia.
This is one of the most heart-wrenching cases that we've recently heard of, and it speaks to so many problems within our system. A woman who happens to be a nurse goes in complaining of headaches, gets sent home with a couple of aspirin. The next day, her husband, finds her gurgling and essentially, dealing with serious brain issues. Now she's on life support and being forced to keep what we don't even know will be a viable fetus. And so it's just heartbreaking, and it's an example of, when you put politics over people. I think Republicans in this state were so concerned about pushing this anti-choice legislation, and this is a perfect example of how when you put politics over people, it affects real people and their lives. And so my heart goes out to the family of this woman that's got to deal with not being able to settle what's happening with their own family member because she's sitting on life support so that essentially a political point can be made. It's disgusting.
Phil, this story is obviously making national and international headlines as well.
Well, it is, and it should. It is heart-wrenching. I'll agree with your description there, but I do think that you do have to follow the law, and I think that we also have to look at the life of the mother, which is at stake. And so I think that the hospital was in a really tough spot. I'm not going to really criticize the hospital, but I think they thought they were following the law. Now, if we want to change the law, yeah, let's do that.
Sometimes laws are wrong, and this
Well,
is
I don't
definitely
disagree
one of
with
them.
that, but you have to change the law.
Melita?
Well, if you look back, this 6-week abortion ban was passed in 2019 at a time when Roe v. Wade was still in effect. And many of the Republicans who voted to approve, and it was approved by only one vote more than necessary in the House when it was granted approval, figured it would never become law. So even though in committee, hours and hours of committee meetings, doctors, medical professionals, lawyers begged the Republicans on those committees to perfect the law, to clear up some of the ambiguities in the language, and to make what the definitions for life of the mother were more clear. They arrogantly refused to do any of that. And so Georgia has a very poorly written law that has caused the deaths of more than just this woman, but other women as well. And doctors and medical professionals need clarity. So this law needs to be at least cleaned up or actually repealed.
Brian, we see laws that have unintended consequences. Do you agree that there should be some cleanup language with this particular law?
This is how our system works. They come back every year, look at what's happening, and make decisions on what can be reformed. I don't 100% disagree with what Melita said. How's that for a surprise? I do think that we need to go in and look at what individual cases might have come up and what is the most humane way to address them. Georgia is a pro-life state. We're going to remain a pro-life state. We're going to keep a really strong anti-abortion law on our books. But I agree, because I've heard this from doctors, that there is a lack of clarity around some issues. I think that that is the legislator's role. It is an important role of Governor Kemp to provide some guidance on this in 2026 to maybe address issues that we didn't see coming.
Melita?
Well, if you look at how the people of the state feel about the law, the thing they should do is repeal it. I know Brian and I disagree about that, but the 6-week abortion ban is draconian, and it is not the will of the people. It is the will of the right-wing Republicans who have been gerrymandered into safe seats.
Well, you can use these silly right-wing talking points all you want, but the National Democratic Party and all too many Democrats in this state are in favor of abortion right up to the time of birth in the third trimester. So I don't want to hear lectures about that. I do agree that you can tweak this back in January, or as we go forward in January. But I think this is, I think the polls show that we're somewhere in the middle when it comes to abortion, but certainly not a radical Democrat position.
Alicia, final word on this.
I think those of us who are sensible understand that, yes, there's a middle road here. I would not agree that Georgians agree with this as a whole. But again, I want to go back to the human side of this. We don't have 6 months or a year or even 6 days when you're talking about people's lives that are at stake. And so let's take the politics out. Let's listen to the hours of testimony from medical professionals of whom we have taken their discretion and their ability to do their jobs because we were putting politics in front of people.
All right, we'll leave it there, folks. Coming up, winners and losers. Stay tuned.
Time now for the week's winners and losers.
Met lots of Georgia Gang fans this week at a Greater Georgia event. Special shout out to Representative Will Wade and his beautiful wife Jennifer. Also met Nancy Papel from Paulding County. She says that she and her husband never miss a show. So thank you all for watching. Also shout out to Governor Brian Kemp, who was there, and also former Senator Kelly Loeffler. Phil, you were there.
I was, and let me make you the winner. You were a great moderator. In fact, you made some news because Governor Kemp said there will be no special session, and so I thought that was good. I also wanted to make the Greenberg Trowing Law Firm the winner too for sponsoring that forum, and so I'll let everybody else have some winners and losers.
Well, my winner is Senator John Ossoff for his questioning of the EPD head. And my loser is all of the Republicans who refused to hear the testimony and alter that 6-week abortion ban that's now causing the tragedy.
Alicia.
So I want to begin with my loser of the week, Deloitte Consulting, that has received a $10 million grant, grant, I guess it is, to administer this Pathways program, which is supposed to provide health insurance for our lowest income people in the state. It is awful to imagine that they are being paid $250,000 a month to do so-called community engagement, which comes to basically 3 postings on a website, and we don't even know if the people that they're trying to reach actually have internet access.
And 4 testimonial videos for $250,000, one of which has been delivered.
Unbelievably bad. And so I hope that there's going to be an investigation. All of my Republican friends who care about fraud, waste, and abuse, here is an issue that you need to go and find.
And I would agree with you.
Thank you. Go get on it, please. But my winners for the week are all of the graduates of the class of 2025. Congrats to you. Congrats to all of the parents. We did it. And we are excited about your future and all that's to come.
Congrats, Brian.
My winner is Slater Nally,
Oh,
who
gosh, yes.
got to the last 5 of American Idol. He's a love-it kid, went to speech school for preschool, and they've been very loyal speech school alumni. My daughter does gymnastics at their house on Mondays, and so she's with Slater a lot, and he is so kind to her. Great parenting by Katie and Slater Nally Sr. Congrats, Slater. I can't wait to buy your first album. It is going to be awesome.
And we can't wait to come to a concert.
We're going to, yeah,
We'll be there.
Free tickets.
Front row, right here. All right. Make it a great week. See you next time.